I think what I wanted to talk about next, I absolutely adore this photo. And I think certainly as a photographer, getting this photo, this is the kind of photo you kind of dream of getting if you're doing that kind of sports photography. This isn't posed in the way, say, the sheep shearers were, or, you know, some of the others. This is in action. And I think we're into the 1930s here or something like that. So obviously, we're now at a point whereby you can cope with faster shutter speeds. So you can actually capture people in movement. I don't know what the actual shutter speed with this would have been. It's obviously fast enough so that these people are not completely blurred by movement. But at the same time, it's not razor sharp, you know, really fast shutter speed, because we've got this fantastic spray smearing up as well. Which is catching. One of the other things I found, I noticed about this as well, is if you like the focal point with photography, what's clearly happening is in order still to be able to let a lot of light in so they can go get as fast a shutter speed as they can, they've got a very wide aperture. And the wide aperture allows more light to come into the lens, but it creates a very narrow depth of focus. And by that, we mean that there's not a lot of places where it's sharp. As you come either side of that focal plane, it gets more and more out of focus. And we can tell where the focal plane is because of where the sharp little bits of grain are just on the ice in front of this man's shoe. As you go behind it, it gets more out of focus. And as you come in front of it, it gets more out of focus. So actually, this guy is mostly standing just behind the focal point. But it's also right on a line where our guy on the right is. And if we notice, essentially, the sharpest point of this is around about his hat. So that's pretty much where the guy has got his focal point. So the guy in the front is in more focus than the guy standing only very slightly behind him. But it works perfectly. And then we've got the stone sitting here beautifully out of focus. You know, I just... Yeah, on a technical, I mean, I just know whenever I've tried, I mean, I'm not a sports photographer, and I have folders full of very out of focus photos of people moving in sports photography. Just the sheer act of actually getting that shot, because also, where is the person? He can't be as close as it feels here. He's got to be, you know, because otherwise he'd risk getting, you know, clobbered in the face by something. So he's got to be back a bit and zoomed in a fair amount, I would think. I don't know what size lens the photographer would have, but he's got to be zoomed. Also, the other thing is when you zoom in, you compress the amount of focal plane that you've got as well. So you are really ending up with a very narrow amount that's going to be in focus. So to try and get it in focus as these people are moving forward and as everything's happening, takes quite a lot of skill. And I would imagine there'd be quite a few negatives of this where he just missed it. So to get the bit where not only is it in focus, but you've got these beautiful angles and lines and composition. This to me is just an absolute standout shot. If it's the kind where if I took that, I would be absolutely delighted.
You know, what's interesting to me about this is, as you say, as a photographer, you'll make hundreds of images, and in many of them, you're thinking, oh, if only that one bit weren't out of focus, I would have a photograph. But this one, it's almost the reverse. It's almost, if you take your thumb and cover up that stone in the foreground, the photograph doesn't work nearly as well. And it must have been certainly a deliberate decision, but possibly even a revelation on the part of the photographer here. Oh, it's in fact that out of focus stone that's a significant part of what makes this photograph. Yeah. Because there's such a depth, or we understand there to be such a depth to the action, and that low point of view of the camera. So the photographer is on the ice here. It's very visceral. We can almost feel it. It really puts us in a place where we frankly wouldn't normally be.
No, absolutely. I think also when we start talking about these narrow depths of focus where, you know, it gets out of focus before and after the focal plane. This is where photography is so separate from painting. We were talking earlier about the idea of, you know, that photography came out of a history of painting, and so certainly to begin with, it's very much, there's a lot of photography emulating paintings. But paintings are nearly always in focus from the front to the back, no matter how deep they are, because the person painting them kept adjusting their own vision. So the front of the table is in focus and the wall in the background is in focus. And actually, in photography, that very rarely happens. In photography, you can't afford to have, especially on an indoor scene or something like that, a very narrow aperture and a very deep focal plane. So for one of the key differences between photography and art, painting art, is the fact that you have these out of focus areas. And I think, you know, this then, you know, this would never be a painting. A painter would never have attempted or thought of painting it like this and having that out of focus stone, which, as you say, actually really, on the one hand, anchors the photo and at the same time takes us past it to focus on the sharp in focus part of the photo, which is the people.
Yeah, there's some historical precedents, some interesting ones for what you're saying. You know, I think one of the most famous ones is based upon Edward Muybridge's motion studies of horses done in the 1870s, where he sort of definitively proved via photography, you know, where all four of a horse's hooves are positioned when they're off the ground. You know, for millennia, painters had depicted horses with their legs sort of splayed
outwards, yeah,
front and back at full gallop, to show a horse at full gallop, to illustrate the speed and the gravity or the inertia of a horse. And of course, Muybridge, through photography, showed no, it's actually quite different. They're up under the horse when all four are off the ground. Well, you had painters subsequently in the later 19th century, in the last 3 decades of the 19th century, like Thomas Eakins, who was a photographer himself. He recognized that phenomenon and also recognized that it didn't work as well in painting, because when you showed all four of a horse's hooves off the ground in a painting, it looked static. It looked like the horse was levitating or something, weightless in a sense. And so there's a sort of famous example that he painted subsequently, I think, with some horses and a carriage, right, where the horses are depicted the way they should be, but the carriage's wheels are blurred. Like the spokes on the wheels are blurred in the painting, and it's subtle.
Yeah.
It's certainly not one of the main components of the composition, but once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, as they say. And it's an interesting solution, but really highlights that that difference between what works and what we expect in a photograph, as opposed to what we expect and work in a painting.